Hey kiddies, it's Triple Feature Tuesday once again, and this week we're looking at Wild West vampires. That's right, in our last Halloween triple feature of 2014, we're going to look at vampires living out in the western United States, because why in God's name are they living out there? There's just nothing but sun and desert and horribleness. And don't get me wrong, the horribleness is what probably appeals to them, but the desert and the sun. I mean, the sun is bad enough, but the desert, people don't live in the desert. So if there are no people, what are they living on? Questions that we have for these vampires. One of the things I like about all of these movies, and vampire movies in general, is that every time they make a new one, they gotta come up with their own proprietary explanation for what vampires are and what are the rules of these vampires. And every time it's just slightly more ridiculous and silly. Vampires in horror movies are essentially Silver Age Superman, in which they can be anything, they can do anything. They're like that annoying kid on the playground that when you're playing superheroes says that he has every superpower, and every superpower that you haven't thought up yet. But, we go with it because they're vampires. Zombies are the thing right now, still, but vampires never go out of style, such as, conversely, werewolves never in style. Much to my perpetual sorrow. Anyway, our menu is going to include The Forsaken, John Carpenter's Vampires, and Near Dark. The Forsaken is almost a good movie. I mean, I really can never bring myself to hate it as much as I probably should. What with it starring the WB, because it was prior to the CW, the WB powerhouse of Kerr Smith from Dawson's Creek and Brendan Fair from Roswell. You remember that show about aliens that nobody really liked? But hey, these guys are sort of pretty, so they're on the road. Brendan Fair, Kerr Smith, is driving a car across country, picks up hitchhiker Brendan Fair. Brendan Fair happens to be a vampire that's dealing with vampirism as if it were AIDS. He's hunting down one of the titular Forsaken, one of several French knights that were originally cursed with vampirism and have their own particular strains. And if you kill the Forsaken that is the progenitor of the bloodline that you're infected with, you don't have to be a vampire anymore. Yeah. So in this case, our Forsaken is played by Jonathan Schaech. And I wonder, I would love to know how the casting went, because I feel like it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing. Did they cast Jonathan Schaech and then try to figure out, okay, who is wimpier than Jonathan Schaech, because we have to have our heroes be underdogs to beat him, and or we've got to present him as a tough guy? Or did they cast Kerr Smith and Brendan Fair first and try to figure out, well, who can we get to play the vampire who's legitimately tougher, but not so tough that it's impossible for these characters to beat them? I don't know, but either way, it's got a lot of good ideas, and it uses the West well, because this one, it's more of like the open road hitchhiker type of West, and the vampires are essentially vampires in almost name only. There is no real physical manifestation of their vampirism other than super strength, bursting into flames in sunlight, and just, grimness, I guess. There's no fangs. I mean, they're not especially pale looking, but there's a lot of good violence in the movie. The two main guys, Kerr Smith, Brendan Fair, they're not terrible, but they are WB actors, so it is what it is. John Carpenter's Vampires is probably the last really, honestly good John Carpenter movie I've seen. Don't get me wrong, I like his entries on Masters of Horror, but, big screen, John Carpenter. And, I'll be honest, I've just been afraid to watch The Ward because I don't want it to be bad. Vampires has James Woods playing Jack Crow, fearless vampire hunter, a mercenary that is employed by the Catholic Church, along with other mercenaries, to hunt down vampires, which they know exist, and they actually have strategies and little, tricks and techniques to take them down, and weapons and padding. And there's a lot of great world building in this movie. I think it is based on a novel, so there may have been stuff in there, but it has a very John Carpenter-y, like a matter of fact, this stuff exists vibe to it, which never ever gets old. Jack is hunting a master vampire in the West, not unlike the way Brendan Farr and Kerr Smith were in The Forsaken, named Valak. And Valak turns out to be the vampire, the progenitor of all the vampires. And he's trying to figure out a way to become a daywalker. Because that's a thing. Valak's played by Thomas Ian Griffith, who I have a soft spot for. He's probably most known for being the asshole martial arts enthusiast Terry Silvers in The Karate Kid Part 3. I've enjoyed him in like this little film called Hollow Point with John Lithgow and Tia Carrere, and he's also sort of a blink and you'll miss it part. He is the initial secret agent in Triple X that gets killed in the tuxedo by Martin Chokus's people at the Rammstein concert, because that's a sentence. John Carpenter's vampires are interesting because they wear a lot of gothy type clothes, but they're really grim and monstrous. Valak is literally ripping people apart at different points of the film, and or sleeping in dirt because he's a vampire. And while the plot is not the greatest thing, it is much more designed to evoke Wild West cowboy type of movies. What the strongest thing the movie has going for it is James Woods, who is just relentlessly entertaining as Jack Crow. Not, over the top goofy, but jokey when he needs to be, serious when he needs to be. And I was very surprised. James Woods, action star, going around in a leather jacket, punching vampires in the face. It was really good. And, we just haven't had real John Carpenter goodness like that since then. I don't think I've seen Ghost of Mars either, because, man, that did not look good at all. Real stark disconnect between the Western setting and not only vampires, but the types of vampires in there. It's very interesting to watch. Finally, we have Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark, which... not the greatest movie in the world, but when you're doing vampires in the West, there really is nothing better. Starring predominantly the cast from Aliens, including Lance Henriksen, Jeanette Goldstein, and Bill Paxton as Severin, who will be my Halloween costume this year, which is part of why we're doing this one at the end of the month. Adrian Pasdar is Caleb, a young cowboy wannabe. Not wannabe, it's just, he lives and works on a farm, but it's the 80s. There aren't cowboys anymore. But he looks the part enough. Meets up with May, played by Jenny Wright. May is a vampire, sort of the daughter in the surrogate vampire family with Lance, Bill, and Jeanette. And they make him a vampire, and they keep trying to get him to, join up and become a full-fledged vampire, but he won't, and thus conflict. This one is a lot more like The Forsaken in that the vampires are just vampires in that they drink blood and burst into flames on sunlight. These Near Dark, I think, is one of the most direct influences for the creation of the character Cassidy in Preacher, in which it's just he drinks blood and will live forever and can't go out in sunlight. Bam, vampires. A lot like in the way that Preacher was a lot of supernatural things set in the West, Near Dark is a lot of supernatural things set in the West. And it ends up being a lot more like West type of scoundrel, like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or Bonnie and Clyde, in which we're watching this family go around wreaking havoc and trying to get away with it. And, of course, eventually they can't anymore. The movie is good, but what puts it over the top, there's this about 15-minute sequence in the middle of the film where the family goes into a bar to do like the last test for Caleb, and they kill the entire bar one by one, And everybody, there's a lot of just great character moments where everybody's doing their thing in their own way, and it's horrific because they're just systematically going through everybody. And it's probably the coolest thing Bill Paxton's ever done. I mean, don't get me wrong, everybody that's in Aliens is cool forever, but, you know, Hudson, not the coolest character. Severin, genuinely pretty damn cool, you know, for Bloodsucking Freak. So, this is going to close out Halloween 2014 Desert Vampires with The Forsaken, John Carpenter's Vampires, and Near Dark. I hope everybody has a safe Halloween, and I will see you next week.